We're back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast today. Again, January 15th, here to backtrack a little bit, I'd say. Look back to the wild card round, and I had this on my mind for really the last day and a half. After, I kind of processed all the wild card games, I just kept going back to something that I kept repeating in my head, but not only just me while I was watching the wild card round, but also while I was texting my friends, watching these games and, just reacting to it, in our group chat. Something my friends and I kept saying this weekend, I feel like, was along the lines of, I'm about to turn this game off, or they need to get it together soon, or they're going to get blown out. They were among some of the unreasonable and the various amount of ways and chain of events that we were kind of listing off that needed to happen for the losing team to somehow overcome their poor performance and get back into this game. And all of that surrounding the idea that all of the wild card games were really just, it felt like they were not competitive for whatever reason, really different than what I was, I guess, expecting going into this round of the playoffs. And, with all the anticipation and really some of the individual storylines around each team. You had the Broncos and the Bills matchup, which a lot of people considered to be a potential upset with how well the Broncos were playing and whatnot. You had the Chargers and the best defense in terms of least amount of points scored. They were only allowing like 17 or 18 points per game. They were going up against the Texans that were pretty injured, riddled going into the playoffs. You had the Steelers, who I guess were definitely the worst wild card team in the AFC, but they were playing Baltimore, and I heard people talking about how they always play them tough. There's always something about them that the Ravens struggle to figure out. There was those narratives, and then you go over to the NFC and look at the Packers. Can they repeat history? Are they capable of going to Philly? They played them close the first time. How can they do it again? They were in this same position last year. There was a lot of that, so it built it up, right? And then the 6th seed was actually the only game that was pretty competitive, so they're the only exception. But then you go over to the Vikings, and they were in contention of being the best team in the NFC. So going up against the Rams, you were expecting this to be an absolute classic. But all of the games except the Commanders and Buccaneers game were really non-competitive at all. All of them were at least victories by the home team by at least 14 points or more. All of the home teams, like I mentioned, won, and except the Commanders. And once they got the lead in most of these games, that was pretty much it. Once they got the lead at any point in these games, you never saw any sort of comeback effort or really any moment where you felt like the Steelers are coming back here. They scored 2 touchdowns, but I never really felt that it was going to lead to anything. Or the Chargers, holding close in the second half, could they get something together? Then they go out and throw a bunch of interceptions, so that was pretty disappointing. The Packers, Josh Jacobs scores that touchdown, right? It's a 1-score game, but by that point, their defense is pretty much worn out, and they don't really have a response anymore. So those were just among some of the things that occurred in these games. And all the second halves, just overall were just desperate attempts from the visiting team to show some fight. You give them credit for that, but you never really thought that it was going to amount to anything. And over the weekend, of course, we also saw Herbert throw 4 interceptions, Jordan Love throw 3 more interceptions, the Steelers punting on 4 straight drives to start the game. Denver, I guess, kind of showed you something to start the game, but then after that, they punted 4 times. They went 4 and out 2 more times, and they missed a field goal as well. And all the lower seeds lost this year, obviously, and going back to last year as well they did too. Last year, all the lower seeds lost except only one of the wild card games that was closer than 14 points, but in 5 out of the 6 games in the wild card rounds last year in 2023, the higher seed usually won. So it feels like it's a little bit of a trend now, right? You could say that the higher seed's supposed to win, right? But I think that yes, the higher seed's supposed to win, but I think some of the allure of the NFL playoffs, especially when you included and expanded it to 7 teams, I believe in like 2020, the allure of that was that you give another team a chance, right? You give another team a chance at the the playoffs, the postseason, things like that, and it always felt like with the one game elimination, you just truly never knew what was going to happen, right? That was the risk and excitement of it all, right? But now we're seeing that maybe the difference in quality of play has gone to a place where it's just really easy to determine who's going to win, and that, sort of unexpectedness and the excitement you get from an underdog story or something like that maybe might not be there as much as we've come to expect with some of these wild card teams that it's right there in the name. They're wild cards. Anything can happen, but it really doesn't live up to that name. I feel like at least over the last 2 years, and why is that? Why is that something that I can't be the only one that's noticed it? I just feel like a lot of it has to do with the NFL now being very heavily based on just the offense, and it's all about the quarterbacks, right? It's all about the quarterbacks nowadays. You know, the reasons for that, they're the main attractions, they're the most recognizable, they're the ones that bring in, the most attention to the game. And you're not disputing that, but with that, with it being so heavily based on who you have at quarterback, it's all about Patrick, Josh, Lamar, Jaden Daniels a little bit now, kind of getting into that conversation, or even Jalen Hurts, I would say, in that conversation as well. Outside of those guys, you don't really see it being like a Sam Darnold, right? Like they got destroyed in their game. A rookie quarterback like Bo, he kind of had it, but it didn't really last too long. Jordan Love, another quarterback that's on the come up, but because he's not in this group, it's hard to one bet against these guys, but also with their resumes and skill sets, and you really knowing the player profile, you pretty much know how the games are going to pan out when you have one of these guys. And unless you have a top three offensive line and either have like a generational talent at running back or wide receiver, or even like a fantastic once in a generation type of defense, you're not really gonna stand a chance if you don't have a top tier, top five, top four quarterback in the NFL. And it's unfortunate to kind of say it like that, but it's just how I feel like it's kind of going right now. And you know, you get the higher seeds obviously because you are considered the better team. But again, going back to that point I made, when it's a one game elimination, you always have that unpredictability about it, right? That you can walk in and have a rough day, and the number 2 seed could be out of the playoffs, or the number 3 seed, like we saw, is out of the playoffs now. And that's why the NFL, I feel like, is a bit more of an attraction, or at least it's painted that way, because it is just win or go home. Whereas in the NBA, to kind of compare it to that, you look at the playoffs and that's where it becomes more obvious, right? And I think that's where it's kind of justified, because in the NBA, you have a series, right, that you play. And usually when you play, best of 7, best of 5, and things like that, usually the better team wins that, because the worst team can kind of have a game or two where they get lucky or they play really, really well. But more often than not, the really good teams with the better players are able to move on. And that's why the NBA playoffs are kind of predictable. You kind of know who's going to be there in the end. And that's where the NFL kind of differed. But now, I think because of how the NFL is so heavily based on offense and quarterbacks and making sure that they affect the game as much as possible, you kind of take the excitement out of it a little bit, unless you have, like I said again, one of these generational type of guys. And also, to kind of add on to that, there's no way you can have any sort of unexpectedness, excitement about these games as well if the rules nowadays with the defense is or are laid out as they are, right? I think taking away some of the ferocity, some of the, I guess, leverage that defenses had back in the past where they were actually able to kind of create some sort of intimidation. I think that also, takes away from it. And it makes it even harder, right? For a defense to kind of impact the game, you think of the first thing I think of is the Giants when they made that Super Bowl run with that great defense. A lot of it was just that they would take over the games, and they were really the overall main factor in that run of winning that Super Bowl. But now with the way the rules are, you can't really create that sort of impact on the defensive side as much as you did in the past as well. So yeah, you're not really having a great defense, make a run from the wild card spot nowadays. I just don't think it's really feasible with the rules nowadays as well. And you know, is there a quick solution to that? Is this like just like a problem that we're just gonna have to deal with going forward? You kind of know who's gonna be there in the end. I think that because of how the NFL is obviously structured, right? With how it's so team oriented, right? And that's another thing that makes it great. You can't just change everything so quickly. I feel like because almost everything matters, right? The special teams, defense, different pieces on defense, different pieces on offense. You need so much of a collective effort to really just make any sort of postseason run that any sort of quick resolution to maybe the playoffs being too predictable nowadays is not really plausible either. It's not like, you just go out in free agency and sign all the best players and, get a super team together, right? If you were to get a super team, like maybe the Eagles or something like that, it takes time. It's not like you could just bring all these guys together because the NFL is such a hard cap, sport overall. So that's another thing that there's no quick like solution to just kind of spreading out the wealth, right? Because these teams, for there to be a Super Bowl run, you need a lot to go your way, right? You need to sign a lot of guys. Ideally, what we've come to realize is that having these young rookie quarterback, phenoms come in and make your run there, right? Where the quarterback is on a cheap deal, make it before you have to pay him a lot of money and start making decisions elsewhere, right? On where you're going to kind of cut corners with the salary cap. So, that to me seems to be like the best alternative to kind of breaking the cycle a little bit is having a guy like, say like Jaden Daniels come in and really be pushing to be one of those, 5 to 4 guys in the NFL, making a magical run like he looks like he is on right now is really the only alternative I see. And it's not like that's going to happen each and every year. You'd like it to. I'm sure these franchises would love that to happen with how they value the quarterback and how high, the quarterbacks just go in the draft. But again, it's not something that just happens each and every year. So that's what makes it even harder as well to kind of break this cycle, right? It just makes me think of, like, when you're comparing it to anything, it makes me think of like, movie franchises. Like, are you one of those people that likes watching the Fast and Furious franchise, right? 10 movies of knowing kind of what's going to happen, who's really going to be there, and you kind of know which characters are not going to end up like dying or anything like that. Are you a fan of that, or are you a fan of remakes of a franchise, remakes of a movie, and having that unexpectedness, right? Not really creating any familiarity with any of the main protagonists, right? Some people are fans of that. So I think that also, kind of has to do with it. I would like to see a bit more of a sporadic, sort of result field in the wild card round and, going forward. But I think it is just what it is now until we just see I guess just organizations figuring out the quarterback position, really. And that's really the only thing I can think of. And it's not like this awful thing that it is, but it's just something that was in my mind over the weekend on, like, man, like these wild card rounds are not really living up to the name. So I'd be interested to know what all you guys think about it. If you leave a comment or anything like that, let me know if you guys are not too big of fans of the wild card round and how predictable it is, or if you're on the opposite side of it. So that was something I noticed this past weekend. And speaking about this past weekend, one of those teams that was unfortunately blown out was the Minnesota Vikings. And looking forward now to 2025, we're going to discuss in this next segment what their quarterback situation is going to look like, right? Are they going to bring back Sam Darnold? Are they going to move off of him? Is it time for JJ McCarthy already coming off of that knee injury? We're going to discuss all of that after this break.
Look